English translation, 476th, contact, Tuesday, 3rd February 2009, 0:01 hours.
Ah, hello, there you are. Yes, Guido, thank you. Hold on, yes, it is Guido's turn. Thanks, Guido. Yes, I have a visitor. Yes, it is Ptah. Just a moment, he sends his regards. Good, thanks. Say hello to Elizabeth, too. Salomi Guido. Welcome and greetings, dear friend. Guido just called me to wish me a happy birthday.
My greetings to you too, my friend, and all the best wishes from me and from everyone you know, as well as from many whom you do not know personally. Very special affectionate greetings, as well as wishes for all the best from Ikarina and from Quetzal, and from my two daughters Simya, Se, and Plaja.
Ha, I feel strangely about this. Yes, we never made a big fuss about my birthday, and now this.
Yes, it is also a surprise, and obviously it was a success because I see the joy in your eyes.
Joy, yes, you can say that again, because I am very happy. Although I am also immensely happy about all the kind words and wishes I receive from my dear core group members, as well as from many passive members, friends and acquaintances, and also from complete strangers. The greetings and wishes you send me are extraordinary.
Yes, that was also intended especially for you.
The surprise is certainly a success. Please convey my thanks and greetings to all of them.
I will be happy to do so. What is this?
Oh, this is an antique camera. At least 70 years old, but the bellows is completely broken. Found it in my things yesterday, and now I want to throw it away.
Ah, why? Are you not going to get it fixed? It seems fine otherwise.
You are good. The thing cannot be repaired, because there are not any components left.
Why not?
After all this time, what do you think? Yes. It is even worse today, because after only a few months or after a year or two, you can't get anything repaired because it is just too expensive, or because there are no more components. We have also been unable to get any for our old Volvo for a long time now, at the scrap dealer at the most. The problem is that there are also different brands of all things, so you can't use one for another.
That is awful. That does not happen with us.
Then you have it good. If something breaks, how long can you keep fixing things?
First of all, for every achievement, no matter what kind it is, small or big, there is only one form of production, respectively one brand worldwide, as you say. And secondly, our production is geared to ensuring that repairs can be made to small appliances and equipment, etc., in the event of damage occurring for 70 years, because components can be produced for this purpose during this period if required. For large devices and large apparatus, such as our planetary and space-worthy flying apparatus, etc., a period of 350 years is specified. We are careful to use as few resources of our and other planets as possible, and also to take care of the environment. Waste products are therefore avoided, so everything is designed so that everything can be recycled.
One brand of product per product. I think that makes sense. Yes, this is only possible because you produce everything and everything of use on a social basis and do not know of money anymore. Therefore, everything is produced by the people, and every human being receives everything necessary of every kind, who he needs, or what he simply wants.
A fact that also contributes to the fact that there is not crime in our country, because every person can get everything he needs or wants at any time. This system, however, requires that means of payment are no longer needed, so we also no longer have them.
And what about garbage and litter and so forth? When I think of the packaging mania that exists here on Earth, which generates billions of tons of waste and billions of dollars, I am terrified.
That is not the case here. Because all goods are handed out to the population without packaging, with a few exceptions, where the packaging decays after a long time of self-decomposition and decomposes back into its natural components. If it concerns materials that do not completely disintegrate back into their original components, such as things made of materials such as metal, glass, crystal, and plastic, etc., which we of course also produce, then these are collected completely and sent for recycling. This also happens with devices and equipment, etc., which can no longer be used, so we do not have any wear and tear on any materials. Our entire population is careful to observe this order, so that no one produces waste, rubbish, because otherwise it would be impossible to keep nature and the entire environment clean.
Then you have not got any incinerators or garbage disposal plants or garbage dumps in nature.
No, we do not have that, because such things, like money and crime, are also phenomena that only occur in cultures that are still in a state of low progress.
Say it calmly, just as it is with us on Earth, where human beings generally boast of a high culture, but still wage wars, adhere to delusions of God and idolatry, glorification of man, mammon, hatred and revenge, as well as retribution, jealousy, discord, lack of freedom and lack of love. But also various addictions, criminality, dishonesty, disharmony, indifference, lack of compassion, brutality and violence, which also affect good interpersonal relationships and humanity, etc. This, together with many other evils, is becoming more and more prevalent, which is unfortunately a consequence of the rampant overpopulation, about which nobody or very rarely anyone speaks publicly, although there are well-known people who know about it. But they are too cowardly to raise their voice in public, and that also includes the newspapers, journals, radio, and television. But as I said, they are too cowardly to publish the truth because they fear for their readers and listeners. The cowardice of those who could tell the truth publicly is unfortunately so great that all the silent leaders hide behind their uselessness, which is not perceived by the people.
An undeniable fact which the Earth humans should finally become aware of.
Your word in the ear of the human beings of Earth. Here, Ptah, I still found this in my old folders, in which I keep stories, articles, and experience reports, etc. from my adventures. It is something that Asket said, but which I wrote down, not directly, but from memory, in Jordan in 1963. I also have the whole thing on my computer. My question is whether you know it.
Ta reads.
Partial excerpt from the explanations of Asket, written from memory, 1963 in Jordan.
The time will only be short when the great day will come for you, my friend, when you will receive permission from me to speak. However, your later mission will be very difficult, and so it will happen right at the beginning. Already the ground is being prepared all over the world, so that your seed will bear abundant fruit. Many small groups have already formed and are working to create enlightenment and to bring about the most urgent things concerning our alien existence. In time you will get in touch with human beings of such groups to reveal your knowledge there for the time being, as far as I allow you to talk about it. But do not be sure of their help, for they are guided by faith and will insult and slander you. And you will also have to endure betrayal from your own ranks. And remember, not all the long bits of teaching and all the knowledge I have received are meant to be reproduced. Your path will be paved so far when you take action that your words will fall on a fertile ground in spite of evil opposition and slander against you. But do not be under any illusions, because even in spite of your preparation, you will still have to fight your battles with important personalities. Ignorant people, malicious people, critics, slanderers, envious people, cheats, liars and authorities. Your fight will not be easy. However, I remind you here that your knowledge is able to recognize and know that Oms or Iman, laws of creation, works must and will prevail. The time will come for you to reveal and clarify the received plans and teaching, and then look neither to the right nor to the left. Follow your once chosen path like an unstoppable gigantic meteor, which unswervingly moves its course through the universe and only burns up when it has reached its destination. Then reveal your plans, the teaching, your great knowledge and wisdom given to you, and create a center of unity where all those human beings should live and learn who walk in your mission under the sign of OM Law of Creation. From this center, work together with the community and bring the words and knowledge to the whole earth. But when your time comes, then hurry, for only a short time will be left before the time and space of eternity become round. Listen, it will be necessary for all groups arising out of your work to create a separate center in each country, and there all shall unite who learn and teach the knowledge of the spiritual teaching. There things shall arise that are necessary to spread the mission on earth and also to bring it into space to other worlds. Centers are to be built, and human beings are to work in harmony with the elements of nature. And one day they will be able to leave the earth without danger, to leave the gravitation of the planets for the time being from this earth, because this will one day be urgently necessary for that part of the earth's population for whom knowledge becomes joy, love becomes self-evident, and the laws of Om or Iman, laws of creation, become not only the law, but true life.
What you have written down here from memory is known to me from Asket's explanations, but I realize that I remember a few things differently than what is written here. It is therefore necessary that you correct the small memory errors, which you can do immediately when you put your computer into operation and I retrieve the true text from my archive with this small device.
If that is possible? Did I remember and write a lot of things wrong?
No, it's just a few little things. And your memory for a whole text like that is amazing.
Unfortunately, that is also not the case today. I am going to turn on the computer now. You know, ever since my health breakdown in 1982, my memory has been lacking.
I know that. Here I can dictate so you can make the corrections right away. You should also replace the German sharp double S with the Swiss double S's, because the German form should not appear in your writings and books.
Not only because the German sharp double S results in an unattractive written form, but also because it disappears from the German written language with time in relation to the Swiss writing.
The Swiss spelling has a particularly understandable way of writing, which is why you should keep it, also with regard to the punctuation marks, which you should keep in all writings and books you write and publish.
Correcting the partial excerpt from Asket's explanations, which I wrote down from memory in 1963. There, that's done. So there were some mistakes after all. And what you say about the Swiss way of writing and punctuation, we will of course consider and adhere to. But what was written with regard to the German sharp double S was not my work, but the work of the computer, which constantly switches on the German writing program for me without me wanting it. Piero has often tried to switch off the German program, but it simply does not work.
As a transcription from memory, there were surprisingly few things that needed to be corrected. But if the whole thing is now read by others, then a misunderstanding could arise with regard to the term OM. An explanation would probably be necessary, because what Asket mentioned referred to OM in their language.
This is not a problem. See here in the computer this explanation which I wrote in response to a reader's question. Wait, here, read it. This could serve as an explanation, or what do you think?
Ptah reads,
Omfalon Murado.
From the cosmic memory banks, there is some information about the OM respectively, Omfalon Murado, which I have compiled and listed for you in an understandable form as follows. The true term is Omfalon Murado, which is called OM, referring to the name of the teaching of the creational laws and recommendations, according to the ancient language of Nocodemion the Firks, in whose language Omfalon Murado meant law of creation. Omfalon stood for the term law, Ir for thee, and Murado for creation. The ancient term Omfalon Murado of Nocodemion Friar and the abbreviation Om are still in use today in the language of the Pleiaren, in full value as given by Nocodemion We. Also in the language of the Timers people in the Dal universe, to which Asket belongs, the term Omfalon Murado is used in its traditional form. But in this language, the word Ori is used for law, the word Sed for thee, and the word Man for creation. Thus, law of creation is called Ori Sed Man in the Timers language and is also abbreviated as OM. Brought to Earth more than 13,500 years ago, the term Omfalon Murado and the abbreviation OM was still in use. But very soon it was falsified by human beings of the Earth to Omfalon Murado, by omitting the ire respectively, and creating a new meaning as navel of the world, that is to say, navel of life and navel of life, etc., which had nothing to do with the real original value anymore and also has not done so today. For the Omfalon Murado, that is to say, OM, a symbol was also created and handed down by Nocodemion Fernster C., as it is still used today by the Figu, for example, for the book OM, etc., etc. Unfortunately, the original OM symbol was also falsified by the human beings of the Earth in many ways, so that today there are several falsified symbols in addition to the genuine OM symbol, which is still in use.
This is very well explained. Use this interpretation. It should suffice.
I also think so. But see here, yesterday I wrote this article, which I would like to make an A6 booklet out of. If you want to read it.
Of course. It is always very interesting for me to read your literary statements, because they always convey very valuable impressions, as well as valuable knowledge, which is of great value especially for Earth humans, because they can learn an unusual amount from them. Reads.
Guns, wrong upbringing, killing, war. Why does the human being kill their own kind or themselves?
First of all, it is to be said that a weapon is not conscious, not a brain and not a decision-making power and will to kill, but only human beings are able to think and decide when they want to use a weapon. This can be of many different kinds, with practically nothing having to be left out. So the weapon can range from the bare hand to a stabbing, squeezing, striking, choking, poisoning, suffocation, drowning, firearm, etc., in countless forms. If a human being is killed, he does so either deliberately, in uncontrolled effect, out of recklessness, wantonness or carelessness, etc., but it is never the weapon itself that carries out the act of killing. But it is the human being, for the weapon, of whatever kind it may be, remains and is only the corresponding instrument with which one kills. And whether killing is done or not is decided by human beings alone, but the fact is that weapons in particular influence human beings' ability to make decisions about killing. It is not important whether killing is done defensively or out of hatred, revenge, in the heat of passion, or for other reasons, because in any case, human beings are and always will be responsible for it. If he alone faces another person who is stronger or who carries an object or an effective weapon,
Then the human being feels immediately threatened, sees danger for his body or even for his life, and takes a defensive position. This happens, however, only because the own world of thoughts and feelings does not follow the creational natural laws and recommendations, but is itself directed towards fear, violence, hatred, jealousy, and revenge, etc., instead of true love, peace, freedom, virtues, balance, and harmony. And if these values are lacking in human beings, then they are dominated partly subconsciously and partly in sheer openness by the opposite unworthy values, which makes them suspicious, angry, and offensive as soon as they see or recognize something in another person that associates fear or danger in him or triggers hatred, jealousy, or revenge in him. In this way, the human being's consciousness is manipulated by the strength of another, by any objects or a weapon that the other person has with him or her, or by threatening gestures in such a way that the person automatically switches to a defensive posture. But that is not enough, for if human beings themselves are superior in strength to others or have any weapons at their disposal, no matter what kind they are, their consciousness is manipulated by these and gives them the delusional impression that they are invincible. In this delusion, he releases undreamt of aggressions, also when he only has the weapon in his possession or holds it in his hand. But if one weapon is in the possession of another, this fact alone causes anxiety and frightening, for the knowledge of it alone or a picture certificate is sufficient for this. But it is also true that a weapon is capable of manipulating the consciousness, thoughts, and feelings of a human being completely and to the point of fanaticism, in every respect, and not only when he is loveless, malicious, unfree, peaceless, unbalanced, and disharmonious, but simply when he loses control over himself and his actions. When human beings are afraid, when they feel in danger, when they feel hatred in themselves, when they have thoughts of revenge and retribution, or when they race in jealousy, and when they have a weapon at hand, then they feel good, positioned, strong and powerful, and become strongly aroused. In this state, crazy signals for the production of the sex hormone testosterone are racing out of a small area of his diencephalon, the hypothalamus, at an incredibly fast pace and in increased quantities. The sex hormone testosterone, which is secreted in large quantities at such a moment in time, half more than normal, not only promotes performance and sexual pleasure, but also aggression to a great extent. The mere sight of or handling of a weapon, no matter what kind it is, promotes the readiness of human beings to act violently, whereby testosterone acts like a drug and is, so to speak, a doping of the brain. And this has been the case with human beings since time immemorial, because they have never truly turned to love, peace, freedom, balance, virtues, and harmony, as these values are fundamentally prescribed by the creational natural laws and recommendations. And it is also a fact that since ancient times, the attraction of weapons has been deeply rooted in the memory of human beings, so that they penetrate their consciousness and thus their thoughts at every opportunity. But this is already the case with children, and a breakthrough is achieved when they are not educated by their parents or other guardians according to the natural order of creation and its laws and recommendations. As soon as children are confronted with any kind of weapons, by having them in their own hands, thoughts and feelings of invulnerability and happiness rise up in them, by which they conquer their own fear. This, however, is further developed and taken over into adolescence, later into adulthood, where it is not uncommon for serious and most serious degenerations to occur in the form of homicides. In truth, only a small part of mankind has always managed to turn to the laws of creation, and thus to the high values of true behavior. Consequently, since all times the majority of human beings have been much closer to violence, hatred, revenge, lack of love, as well as disharmony, imbalance, lack of love, and killing of one's own kind. This is also the reason why weapons are very well suited to evoke a tremendously aggressive and violent potential in human beings, of which he himself often does not know that it lurks within him. Admittedly, human beings are not evil by nature and are also not killers, because there is a natural inhibiting factor in them so that they do not kill their own kind. This inhibiting factor is located in the limbic system and in the forebrain, where feelings also arise from thoughts. If, however, this inhibiting factor is ignored or stifled by any circumstances, feelings of hatred will very quickly develop in the so-called Plutamen in the front part of the brain and in the islet cortex, which can quickly degenerate. The mere handling of a weapon activates a certain learning process in the hippocampus, but also in the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, whereby a huge storm of aggression, so to speak, sweeps through the human body, triggered by a tremendous testosterone surge. All perpetrators who kill with any kind of weapon will somehow find access to it, regardless of whether strict laws on weapons exist or not. If weapons cannot be legally purchased, they are stolen, borrowed, or obtained illegally. Strict gun laws are therefore of no use, but only disadvantage those who use weapons for purely sporting or hunting purposes or as collectibles. Weapons are nevertheless very powerful tools with which wars are also fought, mass murders committed, and enormous destruction caused. Thus, they are for the individual human beings as well as for states, peoples and armies uncommonly cruel means for the exercise of violence, hatred, revenge and retaliation, as well as degeneration into jealousy and death penalty, etc. And indeed, weapons are also deadly means of power in the struggle for recognition, false honor and respect, etc. The users of weapons who kill with them feel physically connected to them, which is why they can also get excited about them. And it is also such human beings who feel invulnerable with weapons in their possession or in their hands, because they are dominated by thoughts and feelings which cause a frenzy in them and put all control mechanisms in the brain out of action. A human being with a weapon in his hand, who wants to kill and who consequently cannot control himself extensively in a neutral way with regard to his thoughts and feelings, is not able to think clearly, because the perceiving and coldly calculating areas of his brain are working at full speed. At the same time, emotional centers such as the amygdala in the core area of the cerebrum are forcibly paralyzed, thus overcoming the inhibition to kill. The inhibition factor is given to human beings by nature and is therefore as ancient as the being human beings already exist. However, since he has free will and can determine everything himself, the inhibition factor for killing is not insurmountable for him. As already mentioned, there is by nature an innate inhibition to kill anchored in the front part of the human brain. This inhibition is roughly in the same area that makes human beings and is responsible for abstract ideas as well as for ethics and reason. But the inhibition of killing also reaches into deeper layers of the brain where, for example, effects such as fear, aggression, and erotic stimuli are evoked. The natural inhibition threshold for killing can be crossed by human beings in their affects as well as by jealousy, fear, danger, hatred, wantonness, psychological behavioral disorders, revenge and retribution, but also by training through electronic killing games, the killing of human dummies and military killing drills, etc., through the constant repetition of such processes. An automatic killing mechanism is ultimately created, whereby the killing inhibition is switched off and neutralized. Electronic killing games and the like, as well as military killing drills, let human beings degenerate to reflex-like killing, and let them finally become cold-blooded killers. Such games and military drill, but also corresponding films and plays, etc., eventually lead to the fact that the gross motor activity is controlled only by the brainstem. This is especially true for young human beings, but increasingly more so for those who feel defenseless, disadvantaged, or disregarded in their lives. In their sick world of thoughts, feelings, and psychology, they then believe they are victorious heroes when they kill fellow human beings. It is not uncommon for them to try to compensate for their inferiority complex by mass murder. The myth of the weapon has been deeply rooted in human consciousness for thousands of years, which is why it has always played a major role in feuds and wars, etc., as well as in religious and sectarian human sacrifices and murders of all kinds. While weapons were still quite primitive at first, from stones to clubs, this has changed over time. The technical progress of antiquity and modern times has brought all kinds of innovations in mechanical and automatic weapons of all kinds, resulting in a new culture of killing and murder that is not unparalleled in earlier times and is uncompromising, fast, and unchangeable. The dangerous nature of weapons of all kinds and their immense killing and destructive power have penetrated the consciousness of human beings and have triggered in them an unprecedented fear. Hundreds of millions of human beings were killed by wars, sects, religions, crimes, and all kinds of human degeneration during the 19th and 20th centuries alone, an earth human trauma. Through jealousy, hatred, revenge, and retribution, countless human beings have been killed, as well as by the Inquisition, genocide, robbery, the death penalty, contract killings, honor killings, punitive actions, and so on and so forth. Murders as a result of envy, inheritance, and neighborhood disputes out of alleged love or pity are also part of this and are constantly increasing. A fact that is not surprising because the mass overpopulation and its constant and so far unstoppable growth brings more and more frequent degenerations of this kind. The human beings are becoming more and more indifferent, alien, unconnected, mean, brutal, and unfeeling towards each other, and that weapons also play an immensely important role in this because they kill without hesitation in the madness that this would solve the problems. This is an undeniable fact. The delusion that guns and killing can solve problems is based on a profound paranoia which affects human beings who have not received a valuable education in the way of life and who live an irresponsible life on the murderous principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This false principle, which is contrary to nature and to the law of creation, is slumbering in the majority of humanity on Earth as a result of a completely false education, with religions and their sects and false religious ideologies and philosophies being particularly to blame. This is because the children's educators teach the descendants wrong doctrines and teach them punishment, revenge and retribution, as well as war and the death penalty according to the erroneous divine teachings, which, however, is an unprecedented miseducation. Instead of educating children about the value of each life and its integrity, true love, peace, balance, freedom, and harmony, the educators, as well as all around the adults, teach or set an example of all evil, strife, hatred, strife, malice, vengeance and revenge, murder and manslaughter, and every form of degeneration in every respect. Thus, from a very early age, children learn from their parents, other educators, and from the adults in the environment, all evil, violence, killing, and all conceivable degenerations of every kind and manner. And what the children learn wrongly in this respect, they naturally expand on, carry everything into puberty, and bring it to harmful, malicious, and destructive effects, up to the killing of human beings. And in many cases, it is so that everything that was learned and developed in early childhood and during the following time up to puberty also has effects in adulthood. Consequently, lack of love, hatred, discord, revenge, indifference, revengefulness, unfreedom and unbalancedness, as well as disharmony, dishonesty, and lack of virtue generally come to a breakthrough. And unfortunately, this happens to the majority of humanity on Earth, as a result of which all the evils mentioned above also spread worldwide. There is discord and inhumanity all around, and everyone is neighbor to himself in a malignant way. And since it is not only the misbehaved children and young people who are afflicted by these evils, but also the adults, the whole problem and evil is becoming even greater and more blatant. This is because the adults themselves, as parents or other educators, who have to give the children and young people an appropriate and life-affirming education, are themselves afflicted by all malignities, evils, and degenerations, and therefore cannot educate and teach the descendants correctly, but only in the same bad and overbearing way as it is their own. Very many human beings who possess weapons live under the delusion that they have complete control over their weapons. But this is only true for very few of them, because for most gun owners, the complete control is only a very deceptive delusion, because they are in fact paranoidly controlled by their guns, and therefore they also misuse them if they freak out for any reason. The reasons why weapons are used, also by those who believe that they would have tight control over them and their use, are extremely diverse. It can be jealousy, hatred, revenge or vengeance, as well as punishment, false love, escalating quarrels in the family, with neighbors and among acquaintances, friends or strangers, serious crises, lack of money, envy, contempt for oneself, destruction, injury, depression, or schizophrenia, etc. All of these factors can very quickly turn into a catastrophe. And practically every human being can be affected by such things, even if they are as sublime and controlling as they are above their own or simply above weapons. Exceptions in this respect are so small among the human beings of the earth that they can hardly be mentioned by a number. It is the bitter truth that a great many human beings are gun paranoid. So many risks increase drastically when they acquire a weapon, whether it be a slashing, stabbing, thrusting, striking, choking, flinging, firearm, etc. Thus, it is proven that the risk increases eightfold once a weapon is available for violent actions if there are any confrontations or psychological problems. Suicides even increase tenfold when psychological problems occur with depression, as is also the case with crises, exposures, and shame. The human beings are social beings who are afraid and tormented when they are excluded from others, treated unjustly, and do not belong anywhere. The result is that he becomes depressed by the tormenting mental, emotional, and psychological pain. As a result, sooner or later, he begins to define right and wrong for himself, and takes up arms to justify and take revenge in a final act, in cold blood and without pity. Firearms in particular play an inglorious role in this, as do poisons and hanging materials, which in this case can also be called suicide weapons. If not only empty suicide threats are made in order to force other human beings to do something with it, then a real suicide act is usually preceded by several successive phases of determination and doubt, if it is not a matter of emotional suicide. In these phases, it is still possible that the human beings who are willing to kill themselves can be dissuaded from their intention by good and enlightening and supportive conversations, and the worst can be prevented. And indeed, there are many suicidal people who allow themselves to be instructed and who refrain from suicide when they get away from it through enlightening facts, because they become aware that an escape from life is the worst form of cowardice that a human being can commit. But for the human beings concerned to become aware, it is not only necessary to have authoritative human beings who are capable of the necessary enlightenment, words and arguments, but it is also necessary for the person who wants to commit suicide to be aware of them. In addition, however, his effort is also necessary to understand and accept the explanations and words, etc., which, however, requires understanding and sound reason as well as his own decision and will. It is a fact that many suicides happen quickly and spontaneously, and this is only because there is a suitable weapon for suicide, and firearms in particular play a special role. They pose a special danger to unstable human beings, both in terms of suicide and also in terms of killing other human beings with them. If there are weapons at hand, especially firearms, stabbing and beating weapons, then very often and extremely quickly, reflex processes are used to reach for them and wreak havoc, precisely in the form that others are killed with them, while with firearms one's own life is then extinguished. Some human beings simply feel bad for some reason or another and act impulsively, and therefore spontaneously kill others or themselves, whereby the success rate for suicide with a firearm is 91%. In order to reduce the risk of murder and suicide, it is on the one hand and in the first place necessary that children are brought up in a life-responsible way from the earliest age on, that they become fully viable and responsible. This alone will enable them to defy all hostility and defy all hatred. Vindictiveness, unfreedom, instability, peacelessness, disharmony, irresponsibility, lack of love, virtue and revenge, etc., as well as all depressions, mental disorders, and malignancies. From the earliest possible age, children must be taught the creational natural laws and recommendations, so that they may get to know, recognize, accept, and obey them, for this is the basic prerequisite for becoming a real and true human being who keeps away from all degeneration. But for the descendants to be taught in this way, and to be able to lead a life of righteousness, first of all the parents and other guardians must be called upon and taught the true way of life. The truth is that in our time they lack in every way. With few exceptions, the ability to educate their children in a true way, because they lack everything that is necessary for the correct education of children and young people. On the other hand, and secondly, it is urgent that weapons of all kinds, especially firearms, stabbing and percussion weapons, be removed from the realm of all those human beings who show unstable behavior, who are aggressive or maladjusted, who fall outside the norms of humanity, or who live far from responsibility and respect for law and order and good interpersonal relations. This applies to adults, but also to children, adolescents, and impulsive and aggressive human beings. And only if at least all these factors are followed can it come to a situation where many human beings no longer see the use of weapons as the simplest solution to smouldering conflicts and wars. It simply must not be that conflicts are to be solved by the deadly and destructive use of weapons, whereby it must also be prevented that suicide bombers and young or elderly people running amok can kill their fellow human beings en masse. This means, however, that the false and murderous teachings of religions and sects must disappear from the repertoire of any educational methods and false teachings, as well as any political coercion and military drill to kill human beings. Ya! Say Silver Star Center, 2nd February 2009, 00:53 hours, Billy.
Of course I was not mistaken, because what you have written here is very instructive. And to make a small script out of it is a good idea, because it will open the eyes of many Earth humans and make them think or even bring them to their senses.
Good. Here's how it is done. But now tell us what else is going to happen with regard to predictions. Yes, you said on your last visit that you would certainly have new things to report today. But what still interests me is that you told me in the middle of last year that there is already a recession in Switzerland. But so far, no one has heard anything about it. Many people are interested in the weather, which is not really important to me, because I have always taken the weather as it comes. I'm only interested in extraordinary things, like special earth and seaquakes, volcanic eruptions, and just special things. Furthermore, I would like to officially mention the 21st of December 2012, because I am asked again and again what it has to do with this date according to the Mayan calendar. I know from private statements on your part what will happen there, also during the whole year 2012, but I should keep silent about this in order not to cause fears among human beings and not to panic. So I thought that I would write something about it in a special bulletin. Maybe it would be good if I said some things about what I know about you, at least in general terms, maybe as a small probability or possibility. What do you think?
Regarding the weather, I would like to say that the winter continues with cold and snow until the last week of March. And as far as earth and sea quakes are concerned, these are only within the usual range. And that also in Indonesia, where there will be no calm in this respect and where weak, medium, and strong earthquakes are, so to speak, part of the daily routine and cause no or only weak destruction. Extraordinary seaquakes and earthquakes, as well as volcanic eruptions, which will cause enormous destruction and claim many human lives, will not occur again until about the middle of May. A quake of magnitude 4.7 will occur near Los Angeles in the USA, and a seaquake of magnitude 6.7 will occur near the Kermadec Islands near New Zealand. As far as the recession in Switzerland is concerned, it is indeed as I told you, but so far the whole thing is simply being concealed, although there are not plausible reasons for this. But what is extraordinary to report is an event in near-Earth space, where high above Siberia, at an altitude of about 800 kilometers, two communication satellites collide, one Russian and one American, whereby both are completely destroyed and continue to feed the dangerous scrap metal band in Earth orbit, which strongly endangers the terrestrial missions with satellites and the IS station, etc. Then, in March, for the first time in its history, the International Court of Justice will issue an arrest warrant against a dictator in office, the 100,000 times mass murderer Omar al-Bashir in Sudan. Of course, he will refuse to do so, and his trading partners China and Russia will also stand by him. It is also worth mentioning that in South America, dengue fever is widespread, caused by the tiger mosquito and yellow fever mosquito. Then one of the new epidemics will appear, as you also mentioned in your predictions, namely that dangerous new epidemics will constantly break out, which will also happen in the future. So a new epidemic will first appear in Mexico, which will be called swine flu, which will then quickly spread to the USA and the whole world and become a pandemic. And the fact that this can happen is, on the one hand, and primarily due to world tourism, because it is only through this tourism that it is possible for this and also other influenza epidemics to be carried out into the world. Secondly, a great blame for this is to be found in overpopulation, because as this continues to expand, world tourism is also growing, as is the worldwide trade in goods on a large scale, whereby more and more diverse diseases and epidemics are being spread worldwide, and germs and foreign life forms of all kinds are being carried into all countries of the earth. This is to say about the swine plague that will hit Mexico first, after which an earthquake of magnitude 5.7 will shake the country. Then, in the middle of May in Kuwait, there is the extraordinary fact that, for the first time in the country's history, women are elected to parliament. This happens at about the same time when the rebel organization Tamil Tigers, which has been murdering and terrorizing for 25 years, is brought to an end by a military strike in Ceylon. However, the military is not doing everything right. As for the 21st of December 2012 and this year in general, you may be able to name certain things openly, but conceal what you have been silenced. If you use the forms of possibility or a small probability, then this is probably good.
Overpopulation. Respectively, all the evils and disasters that result from it. No one wants to admit it. Not the government officials, not the people of Earth in general. The fact that new diseases, epidemics and climate change and the enormous natural catastrophes resulting from this. Increased earthquakes and seaquakes as well as volcanic eruptions result from this. The people of the Earth do not want to know anything about it. And nobody wants to know that through the fault of human beings themselves, heavy and most severe earthquakes and seaquakes as well as volcanic eruptions are caused. And nobody wants to know about that either.
Unfortunately, this is an undeniable fact because very often it is the fault of Earth humans when the Earth shakes or seaquakes occur. It is true that every day somewhere on the planet is shaken by earthquakes and seaquakes as well as by volcanic activity, whereby permanent movements of the Earth's plates usually trigger tectonic quakes. However, since the modern age began with all the evil achievements of Earth humans, many earthquakes, seaquakes, and volcanic activity no longer have natural causes. By dropping bombs in wars and by private, economic, warlike as well as terrorist blasting, by the extraction of groundwater, natural gas and petroleum respectively, as well as by mining, quakes of all kinds are triggered and volcanic activities are also promoted and caused, as well as by tapping geothermal energy, by general mine construction, by building reservoirs, and by diverting or creating new rivers. The exploitation of lakes up to their partial or complete draining, as well as the construction of tunnels for roads and railways, are also factors that promote earthquake activity. It must also be said that village and town planning also contribute to the earthquake, as do the excavation and displacement of large quantities of earth, gravel, rock, and stone material. The geological changes are enormous in this respect, and are so disturbing to the inner balance of the Earth that they are causing disasters that are claiming countless human lives. But this is also the case with climate change, which is causing ever worse events and catastrophes, of which Earth humans are also responsible for about 76% through their unreasonable and criminal population growth. From this respectively, from the overpopulation, all the things mentioned result, by which the inner life of the Earth is changed, harassed, and destroyed, as it also happens with the fauna and flora and the climate. All of this is causing millions of human lives to be lost, and the whole thing is getting worse and worse, leading to more and more catastrophes and destruction, which neither those responsible in governments nor scientists want to admit, although the signs are clear. Due to the irrationality and criminal actions of Earth humans in relation to their existing and growing overpopulation, and all the evils connected with it in terms of harassing and destroying the planet and its climate, disasters continue to grow worldwide and bring more and more destruction that cannot be stopped. To say nothing of making amends for the whole, for everything can at most be reduced still further when, at last, understanding and reason penetrate Earth humans, and they take serious steps to stop the growing overpopulation, and to reduce the existing mass of humanity through a worldwide and regulated birth control in such a way that more human beings die of natural death than births are given.
All of this, what you say. I have already written about since the years of the 1950s as predictions and spread worldwide and sent to governments, noteworthy newspapers, magazines, radio stations, and various organizations. The responses afterwards, however, were so minimal that these can be counted on only one hand. Up to today, one is silenced about issues, passed over, and has everything hushed up. In fact, today several scientists appear, who speak about these things themselves. Yet, all of that, which I have published and said, this is not taken seriously. Contrarily, there are also people who have exploited my statements and predictions as well as prophecies with films and lectures, and massively made popular. However, also, nothing is achieved from this. And that through overpopulation also the world goods commerce through globalization climbs always further. And this massively so promotes that sicknesses, epidemics, and all kinds of insects as well as poisonous wildlife and plants of all kinds and species are carried into all nations of Earth, all of which is also ignored. The fact that as a result also the health of the human, animal and wildlife world suffer damages as well as the entire plant world, which by foreign species is displaced and destroyed, which also no one wants to admit. This is also in regard to the fact that through the steadily increasing humanity, not only the climate, but also negative and harmful changes are even imposed upon the entire nature and all life forms, therefore also the atmosphere, which enters into a negative change. And as I know from you, through overpopulation itself as well as through its criminal machinations, the destruction of nature and the enormous CO2 emissions, an oxygen collapse and atmosphere collapse can occur, which would mean an end to all life on the Earth. The responsible scientists, however, in general, do not speak about this. In fact, they do not consider this possibility at all. As a result, they also do not research in this direction. Such an occurrence, according to your earlier explanation, on the 17th of July 1975 during my great journey, in fact already is to have threatened an approximately Earth-sized planet named AKART through overpopulation stupidity, because in 1975 already 23,023,000 human beings lived there. To my knowledge, the inhabitants of AKART belong to your Federation, as well as others from other regions there. Also Kohun and Athar.
What you say corresponds to that which corresponds to the facts. The population of the planet AKART belonged to our Federation, as well as also the population of the worlds of Proxima Centauri, and others from there and other local regions of space around there, from which several of them have come to the Earth. However, all of these worlds belong in our space-time configuration. Consequently, they also possess several of our technologies, like, for example, that technology with which they are able to bridge the time barrier and come into your space-time configuration. The population of AKART, however, no more exists since the year 2007, because in the only 32 years from 1975 to 2007, their total population had increased to 34,034,000,000, when through their stupidity, like also is apparent with the terrestrial population, nature and the climate were completely destroyed, when, in the end, an oxygen collapse and an atmosphere collapse occurred, as you have described this. As a result, all life was wiped out on that planet.
However, you still have advised and helped them, as you said at that time.
Unfortunately, our advice was just disregarded and not followed, as well as also our help was declined. Only then, when there was nothing more to give, the humans came to think things over, but then it was already too late. As a result, we only could just save as many humans as possible, unfortunately, only 116 million, and resettle them to other worlds.
Catastrophic. On the Earth, can it similarly threaten? Because through all of the nature catastrophes, the sicknesses, epidemics, and through the global carrying off of exotic wildlife and exotic plants will be life and the living area of man and animals and of all wildlife, the oxygen content and the atmosphere of Earth, as well as the achievements of terrestrial humanity, steadily more and more destroyed.
The Earth humans, so I am able to say, are pathologically autocratic and incorrigible, which is why they must first suffer enormous damage before they see reason and open up their ears and senses to warnings. And if they do not do this, then destruction will one day be their fate. Slowly but systematically, the Earth humans are destroying everything and anything of life, of nature and of the climate on the Earth. Consequently, the ongoing process of all-round destruction in every respect can already only be stopped with very drastic measures.
In the all-round destruction, I do not only see the destruction of nature, the habitat of human beings, animals and creatures, and the climate, but also the destruction that occurs in relation to human beings themselves. To this I count the constantly growing lack of love and the indifference of human beings among themselves, but also the catastrophically lack of interpersonal relationships, the lack of virtue, emotion, and dishonesty, the lack of helpfulness, and other things. In addition, there is the growing readiness to use violence against human beings, animals, creatures, and nature, as well as the uncontrollable urge to kill human beings, and to instigate and carry out wars and massacres. The hatred from person to person, as well as hatred of foreigners and races, jealousy, revenge, and retribution, and many other things.
What you say also corresponds to my view.
Good. You can report on other predictions later, because I want to know what the swine flu is about, which Quetzal was talking about in the 1980s.
This is a flu epidemic which originally only affected pigs and birds, but which mutated and was also transmitted to human beings. The epidemic virus will be called H1N1. However, the current swine flu is not directly related to pigs, but forms a flu epidemic that spreads directly to human beings and also spreads to them, which also leads to a large number of deaths. In this respect, human beings of all ages are particularly at risk. Safety measures are urgent, but this will be trivialized by the responsible persons of the states and public health authorities. A very special precautionary measure should be that Earth humans do not gather en masse and also do not greet each other with handshakes and kisses, especially when contact is made with strangers of whom it is not known whether they are sick or infected by the disease. This is the situation in a nutshell.
That's enough. What's the deal with the glutamate, the flavor enhancer? They say that stuff's not very healthy.
Glutamate is probably a taste enhancer, but at the same time it is also a nerve poison that can cause certain types of cancer. Visual disorders, memory disorders, various allergies, metabolic disorders, and Alzheimer's and various nervous diseases. Parkinson's syndrome is also a common manifestation of glutamate, along with various other conditions. The number of human beings suffering from glutamate could drop rapidly if this seasoning salt were to be withdrawn from the market or used only in minimal quantities. However, glutamate can also be used in a special form as a medical drug to promote concentration and for therapeutic purposes, for example, to increase the ability to perform at a high level of consciousness. In principle, however, glutamate must be classified as a drug-like product that should be banned from foodstuffs. It should be banned in purchased foods and should only be used to a very small extent in home-produced food.
So this stuff is not harmless at all, and yet it is used irresponsibly to enhance flavor in countless foods, as well as in prepared foods specifically. E-substances are also often saturated with glutamate, as I know. But there is also glutamic acid. What is wrong with it?
The pure form of glutamic acid stands out as an amino acid in many protein-containing foods, whereby it plays a very important role in the metabolism of the cells, especially in the brain.
Aha! Thanks for the explanation. Again and again, films are shown on television about the Tunguska catastrophe, and there are also well over 100 theories about it. So should I not publish what happened in a conversation between you and me about 3 years ago, when you gave me more details and explanations?
There is nothing to be said against it.
But you would have to tell me the necessary things, because I did not record it as a private conversation.
I can do that. But it takes a long time because I have to retrieve the data.
Of course.
After about 4 minutes.
Yes, at that time, in our private conversation, the following came up, as I see here from the records at that time.
428th Contact Report Supplement, Private Conversation of the 10th of July, 2006.
But then I have another question regarding the Gilas, which you mentioned earlier as the real originators of the Tunguska catastrophe, as it was also the case in earlier talks. But now you've just brought up the issue again in our previous official conversation and said that others are responsible for it, who are said to come from the spiral galaxy M101. As I see here just in the computer, you have said the following at the 365th official contact conversation on the 20th of August 2004.
Excerpt from the 365th Contact Report of the 20th of August, 2004.
The articles are very interesting, but they do not correspond to the reality of the events of that time. It is true, as you know, that the event was caused by a spacecraft of alien intelligences, exactly according to Asket's description as you read it to me with the 86th to the 95th sentence of Asket's explanations. The crew of the large space-flying apparatus, which was destroyed over the Tunguska area on the 30th of June 1908, came from the Catastrophe galaxy, a large spiral galaxy also known to terrestrial astronomers, which is about 17 million light-years away, under the designation M101. The home of the space travelers was a planet of little more than Earth size and is called Catullus, and is a satellite of the solar system Lyra, which includes 2 suns and 18 planets, but only 3 of them carry human life. From Earth, the galaxy can be observed from above, so to speak, but the Lyra solar system is invisible from Earth because it is beyond observation. The crew members of the spacecraft belong to the Gilas people, which is why we call them Gilasers. The Gilaser people were already very advanced in space technology at that time, and were also able to build huge space-flying apparatus using small planetoids. In these, they created large cavities in which equipment for propulsion, for powerful onboard weapons, for external protective shields and electron collectors were housed, along with energy storage facilities, living quarters, workspaces, food production facilities, and life support systems, etc. In other words, everything that was necessary. From the outside, it was not recognizable that it was a space-flying apparatus, respectively a spaceship, because the object remained externally what it basically was, namely, a small planetoid. Its enormous weight was to be calculated with about 179,154 tons, so what you read in the T-Online article is not close to the truth. It is very likely that the enormous explosion hurled fragments of the outer thick planetoid hull and metal parts of the interior of the planetoid spaceship to Earth. And what else is to be said about the huge crater? It covered about 3,500 square kilometers. The tremendous explosion occurred at an altitude of 1,290 meters. It is not a deep crater or hole crater, as it is caused by a direct impact of a large projectile on Earth, because the explosion at high altitude created a so-called horizontal crater. In a horizontal crater, the force of the explosion from above respectively the pressure wave, depresses all the soil, also the plants, animals, and at least the weak trees. The force of the pressure wave only forms a small bulge at the outermost edge of the crater, which can be raised from a few centimeters to 20 or 30 meters or more, depending on the energy of the pressure wave. However, such horizontal craters are only formed by large pressure waves from above and are usually not or only poorly visible, because the distance from the center of the crater to its rim is usually so great that the actual crater rim is difficult to find.
Well, dear friend, today you gave me different data. You seem to be messing with something, or then I misheard or misunderstood something.
You have not misunderstood anything, just as I have not confused anything either. But it is still my mistake, because I did not mention that all 3 peoples of Gilas emigrated from their original home planet Catullus in the system Blira, 17 million light-years away from Earth, and settled 400 million light-years away in the spiral galaxy in the Coma cluster of galaxies M101. Their 3 new home planets they call Bardan, and consequently themselves now also Bardan.
And why did they emigrate?
A worldwide epidemic killed more than 4/5 of all Gilas within 3 decades, so the healthy survivors fled and sought new homeworlds, which they found with our help. In order to end the plague, which also affected all other life forms and was completely eradicated by them, the only possibility left was to burn up the entire planet's surface. Unfortunately, no cure or containment agent could be found or produced against the epidemic. And before you ask sooner or later what happened in the Tunguska region, I want to explain to you that the destruction of the planetoid spaceship also caused very severe Earth tremors, which caused the Earth to split open and released enormous gas masses, which led to further violent explosions, causing great destruction and also creating a new lake. So there was also an Earth-bound endogenous cause to the whole thing. But this was not the real origin, but only another multiple effect of the destruction of the space-flying apparatus. However, we always spoke only about the exploded space-flying apparatus, not about the further consequences.
Right, that is it. Thank you. Then this is also clear now. But now look here. I want to read this to you first. It is something that I have already written for a special bulletin. It might be good if I went into it now during our conversation, so you could interrupt me and stop me if I say something that should be kept quiet.
Your idea is good, and therefore let me hear what you want to explain.
Good. What you did explain to me regarding the year 2012, I do not want to treat as a prophecy or prediction, but as a possibility and a minor probability. I want to begin with a question that was posed to me.
Question. What can you, Billy Meier, tell us about those things that are circulating everywhere regarding the Mayan calendar, and especially the 21st of December 2012, when the world shall come to an end? Houston, Switzerland.
My answer to this, regarding the question, I will begin by saying that the entirely nonsensical claims by all fear and panic mongers, who are prophesying the world's end or the end of the world, is absolute rubbish. Just as the end of the world, prophesied by astrologers, esoterics, know-it-alls, and panic-mongers, did not happen on the turn of the century or millennium in the year 2000, the end of the world will also not happen on the date in question. Such panic-provoking erroneous claims are, just as all conspiracy theories, absolute nonsense and a common thing since calendar calculations and certain and rare astronomical and climate-related phenomena exist. Claims regarding an end of the world always occur with absolute certainty when there is a turn of a century or a millennium. But the same is happening also if special astronomical constellations, or comets, etc., as well as special terrestrial natural phenomena appear. These are factors which are used by the panic mongers, seers, false knowing ones, and all kinds of end-of-the-world prophets to disseminate their nonsense and to frighten masses of people. Regarding the Mayan calendar, it must be said that the year 2012 will bring a whole series of quite special events to which the central star of our system, our Sun, will contribute its share, because on the Sun's surface violent outbursts will occur and sunstorms are caused, which will be very intense and will influence Earth's geomagnetic balance. Through the very strong X-rays falling down on Earth, the magnetic field can suffer from very strong fluctuations. And through geomagnetic storms, power supplies and all electronic appliances can collapse, also those in the satellites, and the ISS may also suffer great damage or may even have a complete power failure. Such solar storms may lead to enormous natural catastrophes, and in a worst-case scenario, to a polarity reversal of the Earth's magnetic field. What has to be said also is that such solar storms are forming up to a climax in an exact rhythm of 11 years, which is a normal occurrence, but in the year 2012 it may happen in an extraordinary magnitude. The Earth will fall victim to a very strong bombardment of hard radiation, which may have a very negative effect on the Earth's ozone layer. Due to the entire resulting process, nitric oxides and acid rain can be formed worldwide, which may have evil and devastating effects on the entire plant life. The enormous solar eruptions can lead to further very strong climate changes and, with it, to immense droughts, bad weather, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, crop failure, and therefore to even greater famines than have existed up to now. Besides all this, the year 2012 brings other unpleasant events, like for example an unknown, invisible, dark, and huge space wanderer that is threatening from the fringe of our solar system and could wreak tremendous havoc regarding Earth. And if this should really occur, the fact of its existence would be openly proven starting with 2010 or 2011, if at all, because the possibility of a dark and therefore non-observable passage of the Colossus is also possible. Besides, all kinds of unpleasant machinations regarding discord, worldwide heavy warlike actions, as well as increasing degeneracy and excessive human ways of behavior, are threatening for the year 2012, whereby all those things are especially evil. Which there too.
You should not say more because what you explained should be enough.
Good, then it's enough. But the human beings of Earth would be interested in what the Mayan calendar has to do regarding the 21st of December 2012.
That is possible, yes. Regarding the Mayan calendar, the 21st of December 2012 represents the culmination of a star constellation that occurs only every 26,000 years. The Mayan calculations are assuming that the Earth, on the 21st of December 2012, shall lie on an imaginary line that fits together the star over the left side of the constellation Orion with the central sun. That is to say, the center of the Milky Way. The sun meets the Milky Way at a location that is built by interstellar dust clouds and is called dark cleft of the Milky Way by the human beings of Earth. On the 21st of December 2012, at nightfall of winter solstice, the sun is directly in that cleft, and it is in such a position that the Milky Way covers the horizon in all positions all around. From this is resulting the optical impression that the Milky Way would touch Earth all around, and that the galaxy would lie directly on the Earth. On the whole, that's the end product of the Mayan calendar recording. This should suffice, my friend. To say more would be too much of a good thing, because it would foster the fear of the human beings of Earth, which should not be, however. So keep silent regarding the further explanations that we gave you.
I will, but otherwise I would like to say something regarding the climatic change that shall not be allowed to be forgotten, but is deliberately disputed by irresponsible scientists as well, by non-profit-making organizations. This is so because they are bribed by big oil and tobacco companies, as well as by noted chemical multinational companies, with great amounts going into the millions. As a result, the venal experts construct false experts' reports and are telling lies that there is no increase in climatic temperature and that no catastrophe is threatening. Groups of companies that are criminal regarding this are gathering scientists and organizations which they have bought or who are submissively dependent on them because they, the companies, assume that the ignorant terrestrial population would rather believe in the lies of the bought-off scientists and organizations than those scientists who are demonstrating the increase of the climatic temperature. They want to give the impression that there are a great number of good scientists and organizations who can prove that there is no increase in climatic temperature and, therefore, no related catastrophe may be expected. In fact, it is not only a case of amounts going into millions, but of billions, and those who are greedy for profits do not care if the world and the life foundation of the entire humankind is destroyed. All those who are entangled in this are leading a conspiracy campaign through which the effective truth of the climatic change is disputed. And through it there shall be prevented that worldwide effective climate-protecting laws are enacted and implemented. If such laws were enacted and be effective, the groups of companies, etc., would lose enormous amounts going into the billions, just as profitable sources of income of the submissively dependent scientists and organizations would run dry. So they are vehemently working on their false experts' reports, which are full of lies, and with which they are trying to boycott the really serious research results of the honest and good scientists, and to insult them as figments of the imagination. As a result, measures for the protection of the climate have been delayed for decades, so the groups of companies, which are denying the climatic change, have earned many billions. But it is true that the climatic change takes place. However, not alone through circumstances that have appeared since time immemorial in a natural way, but more than 75% because of factors caused by the human beings. But ultimately, the climatic change does not only have an effect on the Earth and its waters and nature, because it is already verifiable that the glaciers and poles are melting in a catastrophic way, and that the ocean currents are changing, through which, still on a small scale, new gravitation waves are built that are also running into space at very high speed. So the Earth's gravitational field will also change by this, and not only through the threatening sunstorms in the year 2012, and this will not be restricted to the planet alone, but will also have an effect out into space, as a gravitation-space tsunami, so to speak. The climatic change does not change Earth alone, but it bears effects into the Sol system to the Kuiper Belt, and probably even much farther into space. If the ocean currents are intermingling, they create tremendous amounts of energy through their huge masses of water, which are influencing the gravitational field, besides the contraction and compression of the Earth's atmosphere, which has already imperceptibly started. Through the whole thing of the already occurring climatic change, inevitably the first changes have arisen in the fauna and flora, which are not yet been detected by the scientists, unfortunately, but from which sooner or later visible consequences will emerge. The time has already come that the climate change is moving around gigantic masses of ice and water through which dangerous pressure effects on the Earth's crust are created and tectonic shifts are provoked. This inevitably leads to more severe earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, as is also the case with large reservoirs, which is still disputed by the bigoted scientists, not seldom because they don't want to admit the truth or are paid for their false calculations by the billions-worth companies. However, what is not heeded with the necessary care is the fact that through the melting of the inland glaciers of all countries, as well as the melting of the glaciers of Greenland, the Antarctica, and Arctic, the sea level rises, which finally leads to disastrous geological consequences. Greenland's gigantic ice surfaces, the two poles and the inland glaciers of all countries with many billion tons of weight on the underground, which is pressed deep into the Earth's crust, by which great depressions have been formed. If the gigantic masses of ice now are melting, the pressure on the underground diminishes, and, as a result, it is moving very quickly upwards, and the relaxation leads to the disappearance of the depression. This is not harmless, however, because tectonic movements are resulting through the relaxation, through which earthquakes of all strengths are increasingly released. In another way, through the emerging meltwater, the sea level is rising, through which the coastal regions are plagued by new hydraulic pressure. As a result, the underground is changing, however at great depths, where great magma masses are moved and driven into volcanoes, which leads to new and increased volcanic eruptions. But the total of the immense increase of the water masses in the oceans leads to another evil effect. Because they, the water masses, are influencing the rotation of the Earth in a way that the planet starts turning faster, and a change in the time of day is caused. However, this is not all that results from climate warming because, truthfully, the human being is also negatively influenced by it in a physical, psychic, and mental way. Thus, depressions arise that are spreading more and more among many people on Earth and are turning into chronic conditions. Disorders of consciousness also appear more frequently, and so states of anxiety as well as thoughts and feelings of loss are spreading more and more, just as the cooling of thoughts and the resultant callousness. Brutality, violence, and unscrupulousness become ever more blatant and lead to the murder of fellow human beings. All evils are increasingly getting out of hand, just as greed for enjoyment and the addiction to alcohol, medications, drugs, and the adrenaline kick. This is happening because the human being's mental health is damaged by the climate change, and the anatomy of the brain is changing, even if this happens only imperceptibly for the time being, and has not yet been recognized by the scientists, and will probably be disputed since I openly mention this fact and truth. That is what I wanted to say according to what you privately explained to me about 2 years ago.
What you just said actually lies on the border of that which you may say openly. You should not disclose further explanations.
Understood. But something should probably also be said about the fact that the human beings of the Earth bring about many terrible things and catastrophes themselves, not only in regard to the warming of the climate, rather, also by collectively directing their thought powers and unconsciousness powers so mightfully at terrible things and catastrophes and so forth. Also belonging with that are the false assertions and lies of anxiety, mongers and panic mongers as well as from doomsday prophets, religions and their sects and so forth, upon which the susceptible human beings focus, whereby the terrible things and catastrophes and so forth then actually come about. These days, through the internet, it is even worse than before, when bad news, anxieties, and world destruction nightmares as well as other nonsense were spread only by religions, sects, doomsday prophets, newspapers, magazines, and through the radio. A majority of human beings concern themselves constantly with terrible things which are prophesied by panic mongers and conspiracy theorists, and with which such ones chase the susceptible human beings into anxiety and terror. And the more human beings believe in the nonsense and talk it up to delusion in the environment and in themselves, the more mightful becomes the power of the thoughts held in common relating to this, and indeed until they become the determining might and trigger and bring about the catastrophe or the terrible things which have been thought up. The might of the thoughts brings everything about, so to speak, and indeed the more certainly the more thought powers of many human beings unite in the same matter. That means that inevitably that which the human being tends and nurtures in his or her thoughts is brought to fruition. And the more human beings direct themselves with their thought powers onto something particular, which could or is supposed to come about, the more certainly it will also actually come about. That relates to everything and anything, that is to say, to everything conceivable, thus also to factors of nature, which, influenced by the enormous human powers, can trigger enormous catastrophes. But, to come away from that, a long time ago, we spoke about a world organization, namely the secret society, through which the entire world is manipulated, especially the politics, the sciences, the industrial corporations, the food, goods, and weapons trade, the banking corporations, and thereby the entire world of finance. The big economic and corporate executives of all kinds are involved in that, as are many state powers, many secret services, high-ranking military and secret societies, which every year get together in the mentioned secret society and determine the situation of the world. This, I want to say, World Secret Society amply manipulates the prosperity and adversity of the Earth humanity and the events on the Earth in regard to the world of finance and business as well as the private sector, and in regard to the politics as well as certain armies, which is however officially neither known nor admitted. Consequently, nothing of that penetrates to the public. In contrast to rubbishy conspiracy theories, that corresponds to the reality and has nothing to do with alleged reptilians and baby eaters, which allegedly, as extraterrestrials transformed into human beings, or as cannibals, are supposed to sit in the governments and carry out their mischief, and so forth. An indisputable fact. I would like to remind you now once again that you should not announce any further details with reference to the year 2012. What will be necessary to be openly mentioned, I will explain to you in good time. But yet again, I would like to point out to you that you ought not to betray any further details, nor the names of the Secret World Association, nor greater details in regard to the years 2012. I will tell you in good time that which will be necessary in order to name it openly, so that you can proclaim it openly. And that which you do not yet know, I will explain to you in good time. Good, understood. Then something else. Yes, now on the 12th of February we will celebrate the memory of Charles Robert Darwin, who was born on the 12th of February 1809, and who, as the founder of the modern theory of evolution, made a worldwide fuss about it. Although he initially studied medicine, he later studied theology, which then contradicted his theory of evolution, which was of correctness in principle, yes. Yes, in order to prove his theory, he committed a falsification and deception by filing down monkey bones. But his theory of evolution was indeed not only a theory, but a teaching that was, and is, true. Thus he explained that human beings and animals were not created by a god in one day, but that they came into being and developed over millions of years through a natural process of development and natural selection, which is also true. Nevertheless, there are still very many people who, in their religiosity or in their sectarianism, still reject the theory of evolution, and in their delusion of faith cling to the fairy tale that human beings and animals were created in a single day by a God creator. In the USA, this nonsense has been taught again in schools for years, and in England 60% of the population are creationists, and they have fallen into this religious sectarian delusion of human beings and animals being created by God. Somehow I find it simply crazy that even in this age of enlightenment through the sciences regarding reality and its truth regarding physics and biology, etc., creationism still has such a great power. That, considering that creationism is not a science, but nothing more and nothing less than a crazy delusion.
Unfortunately, this is an undeniable fact that will remain so for a very long time. Because the delusion of faith of all those Earth humans who have fallen into the nonsense of a God-creator fable, and thus into a God delusion, is hereditary.
I am aware of that. The God delusion is a hereditary delusional disease that is fixed in the temporal lobe.
This is of correctness. God delusion is an inherited delusional disease, by which understanding and reason are tremendously affected, and, in relation to the truth, are completely put out of action by God delusion, consequently, logical thinking in this respect is also no longer possible. Understanding, reason, and logic are so infiltrated by the God delusion that reality and its truth can no longer be recognized.
Unfortunately. Contrary to the God delusion, there is also that of nihilism. I have written the following about this in my new book under point 236. If a human being consciously opposes the evolution of consciousness, then it is nevertheless also present with him to a certain extent, although restrictions must be observed, through which certain factors of perception, cognition, knowledge, expertise, experience and their experiencing, as well as wisdom regarding effective reality and its truth, are impaired. This is a fact that is evident among nihilists, who hold a view of the futility and senselessness of all that exists, of the existing, and an ideological stance that rejects all positive objectives, ideals, and values, resulting in a total negation of all norms and values.
What has been explained could be explained even more, but I think that what has been said is sufficient for understanding.
Here on Earth, intelligence tests, etc. are made, which are called, for example, Rorschach test or Raven test, etc. Are you familiar with these?
As a matter of fact, they are, yes. Why?
What is there to think of as intelligence tests and so forth?
The whole thing of all these tests for determining intelligence is to be classified as childish nonsense, because they do not say anything at all about intelligence, but only about the ability to combine fast or slow, as well as imagination and fantasy, which, however, has nothing to do with intelligence in the actual sense. Intelligence is the ability of insight and understanding, which also includes the ability of inventing and finding, as well as finding one's way in all kinds of things, like in unfamiliar new situations in life, etc.
This is clear to me. But tell me, do you know anything about the nuclear disarmament plans, which are to be addressed for the first time in 2009, as Quetzal once confided in me in 1986, but told me not to talk about it? And what about other predictions?
Yes, such plans originate from ideas of the new President of the USA, Barack Obama. He will make his first statement about this at a NATO summit meeting in Europe in April. But what this will result in, time will have to prove. I have not clarified anything else about it yet. And as for further predictions, it is to be said that in the early morning of the 6th of April, Italy will be hit by a severe earthquake of magnitude 6.2 in the L'Aquila area, which is already heralded by a series of smaller quakes that have been occurring for some time. Unfortunately, several hundred human beings are killed, and many of the old residential buildings, etc., are completely destroyed. But there will be another number of heavy and light quakes after the heavy quake, and also in the future, because there is a very unsettled earthquake zone. Another strong earthquake of magnitude 5.4 will occur on the 17th of April in Afghanistan in the province of Nangarhar, destroying some villages and also causing a smaller number of deaths.
Obama's nuclear disarmament idea will be a beginning at least, although it's still a long way from realization.
That is true.
I have a question about the radio and TV waves. Earthly scientists and also private people have been trying for many decades to send messages out into space through radio and television. These messages are designed to be picked up and decoded by other human civilizations in the vastness of the universe, and to attract attention to our humanity. To this end, I would like to know how far the radio and TV waves sent out actually penetrate into space. If I think that the human thought waves only radiate about 1 million kilometers at the most, then the radio and TV waves should also be limited in their range.
This is indeed the case, which is why we also use completely different techniques for interplanetary and intergalactic communication. Radio and television waves have a maximum range of only 1 to 2 light years, after which they become completely distorted and become rushing, clattering, hissing, and other sounds from which data can no longer be deciphered.
Yes, your interdimensional and intergalactic communication is based on a super lightning.
I have to stop you there because you are not supposed to give details.
I am not, because I was just going to say that your interdimensional and intergalactic communication is based on a faster-than-light technology.
That is true. Excuse me, I thought you might want to share some details I explained to you some time ago.
I will be careful because you told me to keep quiet about that. But do you still have some predictions?
I have, yes. In Guatemala, there is a 6.2 magnitude earthquake, after which Mexico is again experiencing a 5.7 magnitude quake, while shortly thereafter a series of earthquakes of magnitude 4 to 7 will shake Macedonia. These are the most important things I have to mention. Then I have some questions that I would like to have answered regarding the spiritual teachings that are not intended for you to publish.
Then we will conclude our official conversation here.
So it shall be. Let us move on to the private.
Supplement from personal conversation.
A question regarding our president Hans Rudolf Merz and the new federal counselor Uli Maurer. You said that these two men, who are the only modest people in the entire federal council, are also not exercising their power. So I think that they are also quite people-friendly and really have the welfare of the country and the population in mind and do the best they can for it.
This is true to an extent, but it is not appreciated by many of the people, nor by certain state powers and the populations of other states. Therefore, also in the month of April, something arises in the political sky, which is on the one hand extremely regrettable and on the other hand absolutely ridiculous. In April, a UN conference on racism will take place in Geneva, which will be very unpleasant. On the one hand, Swiss President Hans Rudolf Merz accepts an invitation from the Persian, respectively Iranian leader Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in Geneva and talks to him. This already leads to Israel complaining maliciously about Switzerland and the President of the Confederation and insulting them both. A fact that corresponds to an absolute ridiculousness, first of all because Switzerland is the host country in which Ahmadinejad will stay as a guest. And secondly, Switzerland is a neutral state, which means that any guest of state or other guest in this country must also be treated neutrally, even if he is an enemy of the international community or simply of another state. So it is not in any right of Israel and its population to verbally attack and insult Switzerland and the Federal Council, or even to equate it with the old Nazi system, which is what happens in Israel by putting swastikas on cars in front of the embassy. There is no reason or justification for this, and moreover, Israel and parts of its population are thereby proving their racist attitude, which is also characteristic of Ahmadinejad. Israel and at least certain parts of its population are therefore just as racist as Ahmadinejad is. The insult against the President of the Swiss Confederation is therefore absolutely ridiculous and infamous. If attention is paid to his and Switzerland's state neutrality, which gives the Federal Council the right to shake hands with any guest of state or other guest in a neutral and peaceful manner, and to hold talks with him, whereby it is not important who, what, and how such a guest is. But to object to this by Israel is not only an embarrassing ridiculousness and infamous degeneration, but also an outrageous impudence and injustice beyond compare. But this also applies equally to what Ahmadinejad will then do at the racism conference because, As a Holocaust denier, he will attack Israel with evil words and lies, with the result that many representatives of various states will leave the conference room during his hate speech. A fact that will also not be of the right, because the actions of these state representatives will also identify them as racists, who in principle would have no place in such a conference. For if a UN conference on racism is already being sought and held, then this should be done in an absolutely neutral framework, and racists have no place in it. Unfortunately, however, the conference will not be neutral and will not be free of racist airs and graces on the conference themes, so the whole enterprise will be a hypocritical sham and a farce based on racial hatred. For decency alone would require that every speaker at such a conference be heard, even if speeches are made in an evil, stupid, ridiculous, and negative way, as Ahmadinejad will do. The consequence of this, however, must then be that the speaker in question is confronted with truthful facts and is informed about them and held accountable for his verbal attacks in this way. What will happen at the conference on racism, however, is not worthy of adult human beings and, moreover, it gives a very bad testimony of behavior. Reason, reasonableness, logic, and decency to the guilty parties, namely those who leave the conference, as well as insulting Switzerland and the President of the Swiss Confederation.
So something unpleasant is happening in the political sky.
Yes. Unfortunately, that will be the case for those who are irrational and misled by racism.